Om. With pranams to Lord Ganesha, with a heartfelt namaskar to all readers and listeners. A story dedicated and offered as a humble offering on 15th August 2020 to all freedom fighters, martyrs, soldiers, and defense personnel without whose infinite sacrifices none of us would have existed. And now, from the prolific pen of stinky, grumpy grandpa Pandemonium, from his recently re excavated, dilapidated, derelict, decrepit warehouse of recycled, reserved, rehashed, remixed, redundant, regurgitated, repeated, remodeled, repaired, refurbished, repolished stories. Tunu tunu, tararararara. Title of the story: Hickory Dickory Dock, or The Mouse's Red Shining Hat. Dick 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 dish. Part 1 of 4 begins. Mr. Mouse gets a new red hat. Somewhere in a village or a small town, in a barn or cattle shed, in a farm, lived a family of mice called Hickory Dickory Dock. Mrs. Mouse, like almost all womankind, was a hard-working housewife, always in a flurry, hurrying and scurrying, cooking up a curry for her huge family. Muttering and squeaking, scampering to and fro, she would enjoy complaining and scolding her family, for whom she slogged all day and also overnight. This family of rodents had inherited an old decrepit grandfather's clock. The litter of little mice loved running up and down this clock, merrily squeaking and swinging on its swaying pendulum. The clock would hence strike its gong at any odd time, driving a highly nervous Mrs. Mouse dizzy and tizzy, either slipping, sliding, and slithering on the stony barn floor, or into a swirling, twirling, and whirling wild dervish dance. All seemed hunky dory with this Hickory Dickory Dock family. But alas, Mr. Mouse, however, like almost all men, was a lazy, good for nothing husband who only prided in addressing himself as Mr. All-Wind Itchwall of the great hoary family Hickory Dickory Dock, or in short, HDD. Moreover, he was a pompous, pugnacious, pernicious fellow, behaving as if he was more important than he really was. He was quarrelsome and enjoyed to slowly poison people's mind with his rabble-rousing and victim card tactics. Anyway, be it so what it may, the author is not a creepy, hypocritical, self-certified, sanctimonious, and holier-than-thou-art pious person. So after having thoroughly analyzed and dissected Mr. Mouse, let's not sit on judgment on him. As they all say, after a good, healthy gossip session, while more the gossip, more is it merrier, but the lesser said the better. So one fine morning, as Mr. Mouse was parading up and down the village or town main street on a self-appointed supervisory mission, he came across a thrown away, dirty old torn cloth rag. Aha! Now what do we have here? A piece of Indian silk, specially sent sailing across 7 seas and 7 hills by Lady Destiny to me. And what can we do about it? Let's see whom can we distract, disturb, extract and extort from with this little piece of cloth. tailor seems an ideal sitting duck, perfect to leech a lot from a loin cloth. The tailor's shop was opposite the town hall on the main street. The tailor, Mr. Paddington Puffington, perhaps aptly named after the tricks of his trade, was bent over his work, busy stitching a fancy handy hanky for a random, royal, tall, lanky dandy. So he had no time to spare. In barged Mr. Mouse, and with a grand air about him, striking a stylish pose, said, "Hello, Mr. Paddington Puffington. How do you do? Very well, I hope. Thank you. I have decided to patronize your small little shop. I encourage local talent, but so modest am I that of such noble deeds of mine I prefer to keep very much silent. So now from the finest looms of the great Mousley House of Hickory, Dickory, Dock, here, Mr. Tailor, is a fine piece of cloth. Now stitch me a hat or sew me a cap, and for this little bit of task I will reward you with a pat on your hunched back." Saying so, the mouse flung the piece of cloth on the tailor's table top. Perhaps Mr. Paddington Puffington would have overlooked Mr. Mouse's bragging, but so intensely incensed was he at being teased for having a hunched back, which was caused due to years of bending over his cloth cutting table, that he picked up a needle and said, "Not a cap nor a hat, don't give me your crap. Shut up your trap, be gone, you silly little crooked brat of a rat, before I give you a prick with my darning needle, and send you scampering and squeaking like a string plucked freaked out fiddle." Being thus insulted, and properly so, for a very good reason, Mr. Mouse strutted out of the shop with his famous dialogue, "I will return, I'll return, I will return." The tailor's shop was facing the main village gathering square in front of the village or town community hall. There was a huge big clock on the town hall just opposite the tailor's shop. The mouse ran up the clock and began shouting at the top of his voice, "Hickory, Dickory, Dock! Hickory, Dickory, Dock! Hear me, hear me, hear ye all! Hear me, hear me, hear me big and small! The tailor is a rack pincher, a penny pinching, stealing miser. Underneath his white dressed smock, the tailor wears a pink lace frock. Hickory, Dickory, Dock! The proof of the dressing lies in its open checking. The proof of the stealing lies in his public clothes undressing. Hickory, Dickory, Dock!" Now it is no one's concern what underclothes a person wears, as it is his or her personal choice. But the mouse was a shameless blackmailer and used these open tirade trial tactics to shame someone in public. Dressed or undressed, either way, the poor tailor would be shamed in public. Now this village or small town had an old custom or tradition of protest, much akin to the song and dance by a bunch of eunuchs in some cultures on different occasions. The village square had a similar bunch of crazy gypsies, always eager to barge into someone's premises and sing and dance in a wild frenzy. Needless to say, on hearing the loud wails of Mr. Allwind, Hickory Dickory Dock, they needed no further invitation or prodding, and they charged into the tailor's shop to begin their song and dance. Led by their leader, called Queen Current Joker, they began their routine act by dancing in round non-angular circular circles. Here we go round a mulberry bush, mulberry bush, mulberry bush. The mulberry bush has red cherries, red yellow cherries, blue red cherries, and then suddenly changing tune and tempo. Hey, Mr. Tailor is a big failure. Mr. Tailor is a petty rag pincher. Hickory dickory dock. The tailor wears a frock. He has a dainty wife, but she croaks like a frog. Hickory dickory dock. They would then form groups of 2 or 3 and clasp each other's outstretched hands held in a crisscross manner and go whirling round in circles faster and faster till they drove themselves dizzy and fell down in a crazy tizzy. For your information, it's similar to the famous Fugadi dance in Maharashtra. The dancers and the onlookers would sing, "So let's wriggle our bums and heave our bosoms. Let's shake and shiver and slither and stumble. Let's tremble and tumble and blabber and bumble. For life is a gamble like a bubble in a bramble. Let's do the hula hoop and a hula bulla boo. Let's sneeze and cough and go round and round. A tissue, we all fall down." And so, as the dance ended, the crowd, having driven themselves thirsty by their senseless dancing frenzy and hoarse roaring and shouting, trooped into the shop with crisscross clapping and singing all the while, "Ip dip dip, my blue ship, sailing in the water like an cup and saucer, ip dip dip." Entered the tailor's quarters to drink a glass of water. Ip dip dip, my blue ship. Singing thus, the thirsty crowd entered the tailor's shop, and after quenching their thirst, loitered around, rummaging through his wares out of sheer curiosity. Alarmed that all his trade secrets of bust enhancing, puffed up cotton corsets, padded up groin guards, and sized up stiff straw stock stuffed crotch covers, hitherto reserved only for the fashionable elite, would be laid bare and seen by all, the poor tailor feared the worst. Worried that his shop wares would soon be ransacked by the crowd which had gathered to watch these gypsies dancing wildly, the frightened tailor, Mr. Padding and Puffington, thought quickly. He knew his trade's age-old adage, "A stitch in time saves 9." So to nip any more mischief in its bud, he took Mr. Mouse aside and, acting swiftly, silently, secretly, slipped a few coins into his sweaty palms and begged him to do some trick and drive the crowd away without any damage. As an added incentive, he promised to stitch Mr. Mouse a brand new hat at once. The wily mouse agreed. "But how on earth will you get rid of this crazy crowd?" asked the flustered tailor. "That's easy," said Mr. Mouse. And he tramped out into the village square and shouted, "Fire, fire, fire! Our village hall is on fire!" At once the crowd in the tailor's shop, with their fickle attention always on tenterhooks and ever in search of excitement, were diverted by the fire alarm. They all rushed out of the shop, to the immense relief of the tailor. Without much ado, true to his word, and mainly to get rid of Mr. Mouse the menace, the tailor, accepting defeat in this battle of wits with Mr. Mouse, took up the mouse's job on a top priority basis. Instead of that old dirty torn rag, he stole a piece of red, colored velvety, soft satin smooth, shining cloth from the queen's undergarments and stitched for the mouse a nice red shining pointed hat from it. Just then, the sharp-eyed tailor noticed that in that melee a few shining anklet bells had fallen off the feet of a gypsy ballet when she was dancing in a wild frenzy. The tailor, being afraid lest he be accused of having stolen her lost anklet bells, wondered how to get rid of them from his premises. Now, the tailor had a bad habit of stitching on fancy frivolous figments while clothing the bare human body. Unknown and forgotten from the history of today's flamboyant fashion industry, he was the real humble pioneer and trendsetter of today's overglorified fashion designers. So suddenly, in a burst of genuine ingenuity but with feigned generosity, he stitched the tingling anklet bells atop the tall pointed cap as a special effect fashionable added accessory and said, "Here, Mr. Hickory Dickory Dock, keeper of your great grandfather's clock, is your new red cap, all shining and jingling with a dingle and a dangle. Now off with you, for I have jolly good work to do. For tomorrow is the day of the fancy dress party hosted by Queen Cinderella in memory of that famous day when she purposely lost her dainty glass slipper." My, wasn't Mr. Mouse the happiest rodent alive? He proudly preened and posed in front of the mirror, wearing his prized pretty little possession, the red new hat. And so he returned home to show off to Mrs. Mouse the ill-gotten fruits of his hard day's labor, namely his new red shining hat. End of the first part out of total 4. Mr. Mouse gets a new red hat.